Alistair Davis is the CEO of Toyota New Zealand. He's the Deputy Chair of the Advisory Board of the SPC and champions the SPC Climate and Resources projects, including the organisation's freight work. He joined Toyota New Zealand in 1979 with roles across most functions in the organisation over subsequent years. He was appointed GM in 1987 with responsibilities for planning, sales, marketing and customer services. He was assigned to Toyota Motor Sales in Los Angeles from 2001 to 3, working on a variety of assignments, including the launch of the Scion brand in the USA, before returning to New Zealand to assume the roles of Executive Director and Chief Operating Officer. Alistair.
Thanks, Phil. Thanks, Fraser, for the pre-promotion on plug-in Prius when we get one. I'll take orders. I guess Toyota's journey on sustainability started about the mid-1970s because the oil crisis was a massive wake-up for all the car companies because we realised, oh, we need to look at sustainability. If the oil stops, we've got a big problem. And at that point, from a product perspective, we started investing in hybrids. And we spent 22 years trying to develop a hybrid, which is a combination of electric, not a plug-in, Fraser, but kind of it's a step along the way, of a combination of electric and petrol engines. It took us 22 years to get them onto the market in Japan in 1997, and then another 5 or 6 years to get them out locally. Today, hybrids are about 10% of Toyota's total sales, so about 1 million a year, and we're by far the biggest seller of hybrids in the world. Cumulatively, we've sold about 8 million of them, and so I'm not sure whether Fraser's numbers sounded slightly higher than my numbers, but collectively that means Toyota hybrids alone have reduced global emissions by about 34 million tonnes of CO2, which by my calculation works out to burning about 132,000 railway wagons of coal, which is quite staggering. And in terms of gas saved, people who had bought Priuses rather than, say, Corollas or Camrys, they would have saved themselves 11 billion litres of gas on those 8 million hybrids that we've sold, which, if you wanted to go to Auckland and enjoy its traffic, would mean you could go from Wellington to Auckland 378 million times in a Prius. And interestingly, all of our competitors have now released hybrids. Everybody has hybrids. But that's just one step along the way. We're starting to see plug-in hybrids. The vehicles Fraser was talking about, one's a plug-in hybrid, the other's a pure plug-in electric car. Those are kind of the next steps along the way. Maybe we'll get as far as fuel cell cars, hydrogen fuel cells, which some of the companies are introducing in some markets around the world. But here in New Zealand, electricity is probably the way to go for all the reasons that Fraser talked about. So closer to home here in New Zealand, Toyota in New Zealand is focused on 3 things. The first one is our own place. Although we're about a $1.3 billion business in New Zealand, we're actually quite a small footprint. We only have about 300 staff. We only add value in New Zealand of about 100 million. But nevertheless, you still try and do the basics. Basics of people development, which both the previous speakers have talked about. The basics of doing carbon audits, CMARS audits, having environmental management systems, doing sustainability reports. We've done those sorts of things for more than a decade. The carbon footprint on our business is growing. And that's mainly because we're growing as a business, just like Countdown are struggling to cope with a growing business, and your carbon footprint gets dragged up, same with us. Over the last half dozen years, we've grown 60% in terms of our business. Our carbon footprint is up 18%. In vehicle logistics, which is the biggest part of our carbon footprint, in other words, shipping vehicles around, it's actually fallen 16% on a per vehicle basis. Trouble is we're just shipping more and more vehicles. The carbon emissions of the vehicles we sell has fallen about 5%, which is a huge achievement given that there's record volumes of trucks and SUVs being bought by people. Still, the technology is allowing carbon emissions to fall on a per vehicle basis. So that's the first thing, what we do in our own place. Second thing is the value chain. From a sustainability point of view, all of us can exercise influence up the value chain and down the value chain. That improvement in vehicle logistics I talked about, that's because we put pressure on our freight suppliers to get their act together. So they have. We've just recently changed from truck to rail for some of our parts supplies, and that's saved 39% in carbon emissions for those parts. But you can also go down the value chain. So we make our retailers have an environmental management system. We use Enviromark. They're all gold standard or better. We make that a requirement. If you want to have a Toyota sign, you've got to do stuff. And the third area is in the space of partnerships. So as previous speakers have alluded to, making a sustainable business and making a sustainable business sustainable New Zealand has to be about collaboration. No one can do it by themselves. So we have to work together. I've talked about collaboration in the value chain, that's part of it, but you can also do it in the form of partnerships in the space of CSR, corporate social responsibility. For example, we had a quarter of a century linked to WWF, which recently ended. We're in the process of trying to forge a new partnership, a bit along the lines of Air New Zealand with DOC, which we hope will have a similarly long-term impact. But we've also got more than a decade of partnership with the Parenting Place, or What's Parents Inc., because the social side of New Zealand has to be sustainable as well. And part of having a sustainable society is sustainable families, and so we've worked with families organisations to try and make sure that those kind of bedrock things are being put in there. So that's all from me. 4 things: the product, what we do about product, what we do about your own place, what we do about the value chain, and what we do about partnerships. That's where we're at with sustainability. Thanks, Phil.
Thanks, Alistair. Some really interesting messages there about a massive, one of the world's largest multinationals, and yet you still make it real in New Zealand. You still bring that global strength to a local value proposition.